Turkish-Armenian yogi, a man of great mystery, and he was George Gurdjieff. And tonight we're going to celebrate him and his teachings. Man is a machine. I always love that phrase, man is a machine. That is, that we don't really have choice, that we're mechanical, that we're the product of our conditioning, our culture, our parents, and so on, and we really just automatically reproduce reactions based on that upbringing, and that we can acquire choice, we can acquire freedom, metaphysical freedom, but only through inner work, only through working on ourselves. In other words, what we would call sadhana, spiritual practice. So he called it the work. And that work begins with self-observation, which is to examine yourself objectively and to see what's really there, not what you think is there or what you'd like to be there, whatever your public persona is, but what's actually there. How do you actually react to things? What are your real emotions? A lot of things come up that we don't want to admit. Jealousy comes up. Anger comes up. Fear comes up. We don't want to admit some of these things, and yet they keep coming up. So the first step in Gurdjieff's system was to observe yourself clinically and objectively and see how you react to different things. And the second part of it was self-remembering, which was very much like Baba's meditation on the self. Ramana Maharshi's hold on to the I thought, or Nisargadatta's hold on to the I, and Ramana's hold on to the I consciousness. And so always remember the self. Put yourself in the picture. Usually we forget that we're in the picture. We just observe others. So he says, focus on that too. And then he said that through that practice, we build chemicals that increase our consciousness. Now, I always thought of that as metaphoric, but it's actually true that in doing this work, we expand our Shakti, our inner Shakti. We grow something inside that changes our chemistry and changes our awareness. The fourth way, which he called the way of the Sly Man. And actually what he was teaching there was a kind of Shaivism, because the way of the Sly Man was this yoga was completely invisible to other people. No one knows when the Sly Man is practicing. He doesn't have to go to a cave and to dress in a certain uniform and to wear a certain kind of beard and wear a turban and say, I'm a yogi. He could just be looking ordinary, but inside he's on fire with yoga. He's practicing inside. And the way of the Sly Man makes use of everything that happens in his life. He doesn't have to have special circumstances, but everything that happens, he turns towards the self. He turns towards God. Later in the program, Gurdjieff himself came out and he led the stop exercise, which is fascinating. Uspensky writes about it in Search of the Miraculous, in which at any moment the master would scream out, "Stop!" And everyone had to freeze completely. In whatever posture you were in, and then you would examine your tensions in the body, everything. So you had to be very conscious. You couldn't be smoking a cigarette, for example, because if you'd inhale and he said stop, you'd be in trouble. So you had to be conscious that stop could come at any time. That was one of the exercises. About self-remembering, he said, a man cannot remember himself because he tries to do so with his mind. At least in the beginning, self-remembering begins with self-sensing. It must be done through the instinctive moving center and the emotional center. So it's not a mental thing, it's either the moving center or the emotions. It has to be, you have to sense the I, not as a thought, but as a feeling. You move from thinking to feeling, then it becomes real. He says, mind alone does not constitute a human being. The center of gravity of change is in the moving and emotional centers, but these are concerned only with the present. The mind looks ahead. So the mind, your emotion is always present, isn't it? And your sensation is always present. But the mind looks to the past and the future. The mind, Wordsworth said, poetry is emotion recollected in tranquility. Famous statement. But that's an intellectual response. It's emotion recollected, past emotion recollected when you're not in emotion, when you're peaceful. So it shows that it's an intellectual enterprise. To have an emotion is a present enterprise. He says, so these are concerned with the present. The mind looks ahead. The wish to change, to be what one ought to be, must be in our emotional center, and the ability to do in our body. The feelings may be strong, but the body is lazy, sunk in inertia. Mind must learn the language of the body and feelings, and this is done by correct observation of the self. One of the benefits of self-remembering is that one has the possibility of making fewer mistakes in life. But for complete self-remembering, all the centers must work simultaneously. You must distinguish between sensation, emotions, and thoughts, and say to each sensation, emotion, and thought, remind me to remember you. And for this you must have an I, and you must begin by separating inner things from outer, to separate I from it. So, that same experience of remembering the self, where you move from the intellect to present experience. You think I, and then you move into your feeling body. Let's do that for a moment. We'll meditate in a bit. But you think of yourself I, thought I, and then go into the experience of I in this moment. That's not a thought, it's a feeling or sensation. What does it feel like to be you, I? The thought I can point you there, but feel that I. And you can see that you've moved from a concept of I to a sensation of I. And that sensation is present and only present. And if you hold that sensation, an alchemy takes place. And this is all that Ramana taught. People don't understand Ramana's teaching, but all he was saying is get in touch with the feeling of I and hold it. And this is what Nisargadatta also taught. This is what Baba taught when he said, meditate on the self, worship the self. He didn't mean keep thinking about the self, he means feel into the experience of the self here and now. And this was Gurdjieff's teaching as well. Because when you do that, Gurdjieff would say that you build certain chemicals. Baba would say you build Shakti. Gurdjieff would say you build an I, a permanent I. And Baba would say you build steady wisdom. They're all saying the same thing in different ways. You're moving from a mind which jumps around to your beingness, which is profoundly anchored. That's the essence of the teaching. So let's meditate. We'll meditate for 10 minutes, and let's begin with that practice.